If you own a home in Texas, you probably received a notice from your local appraisal district telling you what they believe your property is worth. And when the value goes up, it's easy to think the appraisal district just raised my taxes. But that's not exactly how the system works. Your appraisal district determines property values and administers things like exemptions for your property. It does not set your property tax rates. So, if you've ever wondered what an appraisal district really does, here's the Texas property appraisal system explained in about 5 minutes. So, what does an appraisal district actually do? Well, every Texas county has an appraisal district, often called a county appraisal district or CAD. Its primary job is to appraise property for local property tax purposes and administer exemptions and other parts of the property appraisal system. Generally, taxable property is appraised based on its value as of January 1st of each year. But that doesn't mean someone visits every house in Texas in January. Appraisal districts can use what's called mass appraisal. For a typical house, that means the district can use information about your property and similar properties to estimate its market value. That can include things like home size, age, construction, location, improvements, lot size, and sales information involving comparable properties. So in simple terms, the appraisal district is trying to determine what your property is worth. So market value is not always taxable value. This is one of the most important things to understand. Your property's market value, appraised value, and taxable value are not necessarily the same number. Suppose the appraisal district determines your home has a market value of $400,000. If it's your primary residence and has a homestead exemption applied to it, Texas generally limits how quickly its appraised value can increase once a homestead appraisal limitation applies. And here's an important clarification. The commonly discussed 10% homestead limitation does not mean your market value can only increase by 10%. Your market value can increase by more than that. The limitation generally restricts how quickly the appraised value used for property tax purposes can increase. And after that, exemptions can reduce the taxable value even further. For example, Texas currently requires school districts to provide a $140,000 residence homestead exemption for qualifying homes. So just because your home has a $400,000 market value does not necessarily mean your school district is taxing the entire $400,000. That's why you should pay attention to all three numbers: market value, appraised value, and taxable value. Now we get to probably the biggest misconception. Your appraisal district does not set your property tax rate. Your local taxing units do. That can include your city, county, school district, and other applicable special taxing districts. Think of it this way. The appraisal side of the system determines how much property value is subject to taxation. The taxing units determine what tax rate is applied to that value. A simplified version of the calculation is this: taxable value multiplied by the tax rate equals the property tax owed. Texas tax rates are commonly expressed as an amount per $100 of taxable value. So if one taxing unit had a tax rate of 50 cents per $100 of taxable value, and your taxable value for that taxing unit was $300,000, your tax from that particular taxing entity would be $1,500. That's why blaming the appraisal district alone for your entire property tax bill doesn't tell the whole story. Your property's value matters, but so does the tax rate adopted by each local taxing unit. Your tax rate can fall, and your tax bill can still rise. This is another important point you need to understand. A local government can lower its property tax rate and you could still end up paying more. Let's say your taxable value is $300,000 and the tax rate is 50 cents per $100. That's $1,500 in taxes to that particular taxing unit. Now suppose your taxable value increases to $330,000, but the tax rate falls from 50 cents to 49 cents. Your tax rate went down, but your tax bill would increase to about $1,617. So when you hear that a local government lowered the tax rate, don't automatically assume your tax bill will go down. You have to look at both the taxable value and the tax rate. So what if the appraisal district gets your value wrong? Texas property owners have the right to protest certain appraisal district actions. Maybe the district has the wrong square footage for your house. Maybe it lists an improvement that does not exist. Maybe your property has damage or condition issues that aren't being properly accounted for. Or maybe you believe the appraisal district's value simply isn't supported by the evidence. You can file a protest. The usual deadline is May 15th or 30 days after the appraisal district mails your notice of appraised value, whichever is later. If the disagreement is not resolved informally, it can generally proceed to an Appraisal Review Board or ARB. And if you're going to protest, remember, don't just argue that your taxes are too high. Bring evidence relevant to what you're actually challenging. In summary, here is the Texas appraisal system in its simplest form. The appraisal district determines property values and administers exemptions and other appraisal-related provisions. Homestead appraisal limitations and exemptions can reduce the value ultimately subject to taxation. Your local taxing units adopt their property tax rates, and those tax rates are applied to your taxable values to determine your property taxes. So when you receive your next appraisal notice, don't just look at the biggest number on the page. Look at your market value, look at your appraised value, make sure your exemptions are being applied, and look at the taxable value for each taxing unit. Then, when your local governments adopt their property tax rates, pay attention to those too, because the appraisal district controls an important part of the process, but it does not control the entire property tax bill. If you take anything away from this video, I just want you to remember one thing. The appraisal district determines property values, and your local taxing units adopt the tax rates. You need to understand both to understand why you're paying what you're paying in your Texas property taxes. If you enjoyed this informative video, please like and subscribe to Lone Star Breakdown, where I break down Texas government, taxes, and facts and present them in a way that's easy to understand. See you next time.